So you have a desire to retire, and that's great. You've taken the time to define what you want your retirement to look like, your defined vision, if you will. But now the question is, how are you going to pay for it? That's what I want to address on today's show. If we haven't met before, I'm Mike Potter, certified financial planner professional and owner of True Wealth Financial. I believe that retirement should be prosperous, enjoyable, and purposeful. But a lot of people struggle with navigating the path into retirement. And rightfully so, as money and retirement in general is confusing, challenging, complex, and it's all new to you. You've never done it before. This show is dedicated to helping Christians create and optimize a retirement plan so that they can retire with confidence. Thanks again for tuning in. So last week, we outlined how to define your retirement, creating that ideal retirement vision, if you will. We discussed the construct of using needs, wants, and wishes to help formulate some ideas and get them out of your head on paper. Additionally, we introduced you to Steve and Sarah Starter, who's a case study that we're using to illustrate the initial steps of retirement planning. Just as a reminder, Steve and Sarah are both 60 years old. They're both currently working. They have 2 children, both are married, and they also have 2 grandchildren. Now, it might seem obvious, but when you stop working, your paychecks go away. But yet in retirement, you still need an income. So that's what we're going to help Steve and Sarah unpack today. Essentially, is how they're going to pay for the retirement life that they envisioned. And hopefully it'll help you with yours as well. Now, as a reminder, there are 4 different sources that we use to pay for retirement. We call them human capital, social capital, financial capital, and personal use capital. Now, we did a whole show on this some time back, a couple weeks ago, called Every Retiree Will Need to Create a Retirement Income. Right? It's one of the 5 things that every retiree will have to decide on. It's really the heart of retirement planning. So let's start to unpack this a little bit for Steve and Sarah. So the first thing is that of human capital. So human capital really is income that we gain from some sort of work or labor or service that we provide. So for when you're leading into retirement, most people are still working full time. So that will be there leading up to it. And then maybe some people do some part-time work, so a little bit of consulting. If you have rental properties, I put it under this area because although rental properties are quote unquote passive, if you own rental properties, you know they're not completely passive. You have repairs and maintenance and renters and evictions and taxes and all kinds of stuff. There's things involved with renters. So there's still some work. So I put it in this kind of here. So for Steve and Sarah, Sarah is a teacher and she plans on working for the next 3 more years, 3 more school years. She currently has about $65,000 a year. Steve is a project manager. He envisions working for 5 more years up till age 60, when essentially he'll stop working. They'll drop their insurance then and then transition into Medicare. So that's kind of why he's making age 65. He currently makes $95,000 a year. Steve also has some maybe desire to do a little bit of consulting, kind of rather than just working up and falling off a cliff from work perspective, kind of more gradually working down, but not the same pace, not as much administrative, not as much bureaucracy, but really just doing some independent consulting work. He maybe thinks for 2 years, maybe 3 years, and making about $36,000 a year. So maybe $3,000 a month for that. And essentially that's what they have from a human capital perspective. So then next we look at social capital, right? So social capital, for a lot of people, it's going to be Social Security Administration. It could be pensions that they have. It could be annuities that they've bought or other fixed income that they might be receiving from trusts or things like it. The idea of social capital is that it's not based upon work at all. It's just based upon, honestly, you breathing, right? As long as you keep breathing, the checks are going to continue to keep coming in, right? That's kind of the idea here. And then some of them will have cost of living increases like Social Security, maybe annuities. Others will not, generally like pensions or fixed annuities. So in Steve and Sarah's case, Sarah anticipates her Social Security benefit being $1,800 a month at age 65. And the way she got that is she logged into socialsecurity.gov, logged on, and pulled up her Social Security statements. On there, it gives you kind of an outlay year by year from 62 to 70 of what your benefits will be if you continue working up to that point. So her statement has age 18. Now, that's not the most accurate way to get that information, but it's a good way to start, right? If you've never done any kind of analysis on Social Security, it's a good way to start. So that's where Steve and Sarah are starting for now. Steve, same thing. He looked at his Social Security statement and he has a benefit at age 67. That's where he's anticipating starting his of $3,000 a month. The reason why Steve's starting his at 67 is because that will get the maximum survivor benefit for Sarah. So obviously we have a 2-year income gap where his income is going to stop primarily at 65. He'll do a little bit of consulting. Social Security will start on at 67. So this illustrates the dynamic nature of retirement income. That's why I don't like this 4% rule and things like that, because it's not fixed like that. Retirement income is very dynamic. Things turn off, things turn on, things go down, things increase. Right? It's not static. It's not linear. It's kind of up and down based upon things. Now, normally by the time you get to 70, 75, it's a little bit more static, a little bit more linear in nature. But especially during those initial transition years, lots of things are changing year by year. So that's her Social Security. Sarah, again, I mentioned she's a teacher, so she anticipates having a little pension of about $1,500 a month starting at age 63. So that's what they have from a social perspective. So now we've outlined the first two parts. We've outlined their human capital and their social income streams. If you're finding this information helpful or informative, please hit the like button. It's a great way to let me know to do more shows like this. Plus, it's a nice way to say thank you. So next, we want to unpack financial capital. This is generally what most people think about when they think about paying for retirement. They think of this proverbial number to get to. Once I get to this number in my nest egg, then I can retire. Well, as we hopefully have already illustrated, really financial capital, the assets that you have, is just really one piece of the puzzle. Now, it might be a big piece for your puzzle, but it's really just one part of the overall plan of creating a retirement income. So looking at Steve and Sarah's financial capital again, so this would be accounts, retirement accounts, inheritances, things like that they have. So again, Steve and Sarah, they have currently cash on hand in a money market account, earning about 4 or 5%, 4% now, given that the Federal Reserve rates came down, but it was getting 5%, doing really well from an interest, risk-free interest, 5%, can't beat that. So they have $40,000 in their money market account. Sarah has a 403B account that they contributed to. She has around $150,000 in that. Steve has a 401k at work that he has about $350,000 in. Steve also has a traditional IRA, or really a rollover IRA from a previous employer he had a couple of decades ago that has about $80,000 in it. And Steve and Sarah both have IRAs in them, Roth IRAs of about $75,000, right? So that's essentially what they have from that perspective. But these are continuing to grow because, again, they're working for a couple more years. So they currently are both putting in about $5,000 into their Roth IRAs. Sarah is contributing 10% to her 403B and getting a 3% match. Steve also is putting 10% of his income into 401k and getting a 4% match. So where their assets are is not where their assets are going to be in the future. We're going to have hopefully growth along the way, plus more money going into it. So we want to kind of target what's it going to look like at that retirement line, if you will. And so that will help us. Additionally, Sarah anticipates the idea potentially of giving an inheritance from her parents in the future. Conservatively, she's thinking maybe $1,000 taxable that's really coming from the sale of her parents' house, and then maybe another $100,000 in a tax-deferred traditional IRA that her dad has that will become an inherited IRA that we can use potentially spreading it out over that 10-year rule for helping with that retirement income. So future retirements, no guarantees on any of those things. Obviously, her take is on it. If her parents need it, then it's for them. But that's what she's anticipating after kind of splits with her siblings. But we'll put that in there. Obviously, that can come and go. But the idea, again, is getting all this stuff kind of out of your head and on paper where you can begin to see it. So the next section is that of personal use assets. So a lot of times people overlook this as a category. This would be things like that you own, essentially, possessions that you own today that could be turned into capital later and then used to pay for things in retirement. Obvious case would be something like a house or cars or other property that you own. So for example, I have a couple clients now that have essentially used their house equity. They had their house paid off, but they sold it to move into retirement communities, or some of them into CCRCs, continuous care retirement communities. It's basically a place where you kind of buy into independent living, and then assisted living, maybe memory care, nursing home, end of life care, stuff like that. It's kind of continuous care. This is also a good thing to help you use for legacy goals, right? So as a reminder, Sarah and Steve outlined part of their legacy goals is to leave money for their kids and their church. And so they could potentially use the sale of their house to help fund some of those legacy goals if they don't need it for themselves. So Sarah and Steve really have three assets that they have, personal use assets that they could potentially use. They have their house, which they anticipate being worth about $150,000 today. And they have two vehicles, one that's currently worth $17,000 and one that's worth about $24,000. So that is where their overall capital is. So we talked about their human capital, we talked about their social capital, talked about their financial capital, and their personal assets. The question is then, will this work? Do they have enough money to pay for the life that they envisioned? That's what we'll begin to test for feasibility, and we'll begin illustrating that over the next 2 weeks, because there's actually two different ways that we test for feasibility. One looking forward, really, and one looking backwards. Today, we talked about paying for your retirement, and we used Steve and Sarah to help illustrate that process. If you're still with me and you're finding this information helpful and valuable, please consider subscribing. You'll find out in the next couple weeks how Steve and Sarah look from a feasibility perspective. Plus, you'll be notified of future episodes going forward. Imagine what it's going to be like to have retirement paid for. You know what you want, and you know what you have to pay for it. This is what retirement planning is all about. And it really boosts the confidence and the peace to help you navigate into that stage of life. If this is all new to you, I have a resource PDF that might be helpful for you. It'll help you get this information out of your head and on paper where you can see it and talk about it. I'll send it out on our weekly email. If you're not part of our weekly email, you can email me at mike@truewealth.show and I'll send you a copy and add you to our list. If you have a retirement planning, a good micro action might be this week to revisit some of that future income streams, really the human and social, right? Revisit those amounts, as well as looking again at your assets. They might have increased over the last couple of years, and you will make sure that they're accurate and up to date. Remember, when you stop working, your income goes away. So you need to have a plan of how to pay for retirement. Hope this helps you on your path to a prosperous, enjoyable, and purposeful retirement. Until next time, hope you have a great day. Thanks again for taking the time to watch this week's episode of the True Wealth Financial Show. I encourage you to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Additionally, you can find more information on our website at www.truewealth.show. One final note, though, as we wrap up to today's show. While I hope the information was helpful, valuable, and insightful, it's really for information and educational purposes only. Prior to making any decisions or taking any actions, I'd strongly encourage you to talk to your legal, tax, estate, or financial advisor who's familiar with the unique circumstances of your particular personal situation. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, hope you have a great day.